Previously on the Seventh Valkyrie, Meridia leaves the remnants of the barge and begins her return to the new city through waters overrun with Freelander forces. What awaits her as she attempts to rejoin the war effort on shore? Find out now on the Seventh Valkyrie. Chapter 32. The Ones Who Stand. Meridia, the 21st day of winter, the black of night. As she swam back to shore, Meridia curved her route away from the heart of the fighting, looping nearly to the bay's edge before bending along the northern cliff face, using a slow, steady side stroke that would avoid drawing attention and let her keep an eye out for stray vessels patrolling the waters. It cost her precious time, and as she neared the shore, the struggle for the sea had all but finished. But her caution had been warranted. Even though the vast majority of family forces now orbited the riverfront wharf, wave runners still cruised the bay, picking off veteran survivors where they found them. Streaming lines of old city soldiers crossing the barges with impunity only confirmed to Meridia that the battlefront had shifted to the shores of the new city, where defenders fought back an ever-growing mass of thwarps beating at the veins and arteries of the Eteran stronghold. Things were not going well, but the fight wasn't over yet. Each level of the city could be fortified, and the uphill climb was filled with countless kill holes, escape passages, and choke points specifically designed to supplement Eteran battlefield tactics. Even against the Machine King's men, a legion of turncoats, and a battle-mad horde of thwarps, the new city might still have a chance. Meridia tweaked her course to aim for the cliffside wharf, where the fighting was quieter. Well, if the violent screams of a frantic horde smashing against a rigid formation of soldiers could ever be called quiet. Unlike on the riverside wharf, where the fighting had pressed all the way up against the walls, the cliffside Eterans had been able to reinforce a defensive perimeter outside the first-level staircases. But word of the old city's advance had made its way to the cliffs, and spurred by the press of their companions and the success by the riverside, thwarps threw themselves at the new city like maniacs, leaping, glowing with power into gaps in the Eteran formation. For each that fell under crushing spears and blades, there were two others ready to surge in and cause more damage. And despite the piles of dead thwarts that were growing by the minute, Meridia could sense the flow of battle slowly turning in favor of the old city. Eterans relied on strict hierarchies in battle. It was the only way to turn a group of men into a single organized war machine capable of standing against the thwarps and their otherworldly power. And even if officers fell in battle, there was a designated progression of that hierarchy, down to the last chef on the cook line, so the next man was already prepared to step up. But practically the entire elite officer corps had died out on the barges, and for every new city man who would rise to the challenge, there would be three that were just a step out of their league. And there was really no replacing actual real war experience, especially in a brutal fight for survival. The troop rotations were a touch sluggish on the wharf. Gaps in the lines closed half a second too slowly. By themselves, each of those faults in the Eteran war machine was minuscule, a detail that would take a well-trained eye to spot. But those gaps on the fringes, openings, and vulnerabilities, they would just get worse as men fell, and as mind and body and morale weakened. The thwarps were pressing on, and if nothing changed, the men on the cliffside were just going to be delaying the inevitable. Meridia ducked under the water as a vessel went by, but before she submerged, she heard Mandarian voices intertwined with the Freelander ones. Fuck, how many of the capital soldiers have been traitors. She would track down each one and rip their fucking spine out their ass. God damn it, fuck. Meridia closed her eyes as she counted to 20 beneath the surface, shivering in the cold water, and then emerged with only her nose and mouth above the surface to breathe. As mad as she was, her first priority was getting out of the water and onto the battlefield. She was helpless out here in the bay. Her route had taken her to about 200 yards offshore, which was too far to travel in a single breath, so she made the trip in short, careful segments. She'd slip below the waves, curl her path deep underwater, emerge to catch a breath with only her nose and mouth, and then slowly sink back into the depths. It was agonizingly slow, and with each emergence, the clamor grew louder. Eventually, Meridia surfaced to breathe just a few dozen yards from the wharf, where she rested, laying motionless next to 3 floating, mangled corpses of indistinguishable race. Whether you were cooked by flame or boiling oil, whether you were torn apart by steel or by ice, mangled corpses in dark water tended to all look the same. Through ears mostly filled with water, Meridia strained to hear the movements around her, trying to trace the flow of the battle, but with wave runners patrolling the water less than a stone's throw away, she couldn't risk sticking her head fully above the water for a better look. From the scattered fragments of orders that she did hear, Meridia could tell that the veteran formation was holding for now, but the roars of Freelander warriors were getting louder, and the booms and hisses of thwart powers hammered the air. Taking a deep breath, Meridia drew the 2 throwing daggers she'd salvaged from the sinking She-Fox set, and slowly submerged beneath the surface. This time, when she emerged, it would be on the battlefield. A few pulsing strokes brought her under the wharf, into the murky dark lit only by the shafts of light where thwart powers or Edoran weapons had punctured the wood, and in part by the blue glow of 2 thwart warriors hiding in the shadow of a backside staircase onto the wharf. With their eyes locked on the battle above them, not the water behind them, Meridia was able to burst from the darkness and kill them both before they could react. She only prepared for her next move when the last fragments of their power had blinked out and they sank deep beneath the water. Without her armor, bow, or preferred hand-to-hand weapons, Meridia was cautious as she crept up the stairs, scanning every angle as she peeked into the chaos of battle. 40 yards. That was the distance between her and the defensive line of the Edorans, where shields, pikes, and arrows raining down from above kept the shifting line of Freelanders at bay. But outside of their formation, Edoran soldiers lay dead, with others beyond them, and still others past the staircase where Meridia hid. Like the marks of high tide now fading, they told in blood what anybody could see. The Edorans were falling back, and they were on their last legs. A little over 40 yards. How many lives had been lost defending that short distance? It was a mile to give when you were pinned in formation, and behind the lines, Meridia could hear a sudden change in the predominant voices. Another interim commanding officer was dead, and Meridia didn't have another second to lose. Instinct took over, and Meridia snorted out, breathing in once, twice, and then charging up the stairs onto the wharf, first on all fours and then breaking out into a full sprint. The first thwart in her way, she dodged. The second, she knifed in the back. And then the third, fourth, and fifth, she caught with a lowered shoulder in the back as she gained speed, eventually skewering all 3 onto the Edoran pikes before Meridia leapt over the Edoran defensive line, diverting a stray pike aiming for her, and landed on the ground at the center of the formation. By the time she had rolled to her feet, she had spotted the nearest bow, commandeered it from the slow-moving reserve archer who was reloading it, dodged a lobbed fireball, and drew the longbow to full extension, locking her gaze where the fireball had come and letting loose. The reserve archer stumbled, the thwart fell silent, pierced through the eye into the brain, and the recently promoted officer all stammered at the same time, but to her it was just noise. Meridia had seized command, and was flowing into her reload directly from the reserve archer's quiver, drawing it, scanning for her next target, and assessing the battlefield as well as their formation all at the same time. Some of the soldiers had turned to Meridia when she leapt into the formation, twisting with all of the speed and sharpness of exhausted arms as they readied to fight yet another battle-mad thwart. But they let out groans and gasps of relief, as instead they were greeted by Meridia Firebow, protector of the new city. It was one thing to hear the stories, and it was another to see the living, breathing, towering, and furious warrior with an Edarin longbow bent so far back it looked like a toy in her hands. There would be more stories after tonight, but as she fired, and the bow thrummed out in response to a true archer's draw, sending death out into the night, there were only 2 words that echoed out. Lireshka Vren! The battle cry raced out through the formation. Battle lines strengthened, soldiers slammed the ground with their shields, their spirits lifting as they cried out in response. They had a hero on their side now, come to slay the monsters at their door. With every arrow fired into the swirling crowd, Meridia bellowed her commands, sending the mishmash of hardened veterans and terrified recruits into perfect formation. The gaps closed even tighter, the rotations became smooth, and where before the volleys of stone and earth and fire had wreaked havoc on the Edarin battalion, now the hissing death of arrows cut thwarps down where they stood. The retreat slowed and then stopped, and then eventually out beyond the battle lines, frustrated thwarps began to give ground, creating defensive structures out of columns of ice and broken wood to regroup. Meridia bristled as the more foolish thwarps thinned out, and the ones who remained approached far more cautiously. No matter how brightly the battle lamps shined, even her aim wasn't perfect in the dead of night, especially against targets peeking out from behind cover. The Edarins overall had stopped the bleeding, but they would need reinforcements. A well-organized phalanx would hold against an unorganized group of thwarps for a while, but even Edarin's steel, training, and resolve couldn't ward off the rain of thwart powers forever, not with more wave runners arriving from the bay by the minute. A glance back between reloads was all that Meridia could spare in the pace of battle, but it was enough to tell her that for now the staircase lay empty behind them, with no sign of reserve forces. Meridia gritted her teeth. God damn it, a few squads of experienced men were all that she needed to push forward and reset the line, even to secure the docks, but she didn't even have that. Meridia fired another arrow, but she was taking half chances now, trying to predict and guess where new thwarps might appear, rather than catching them exposed. And even pooled together, the formation's arrows as a whole were running low. Moreover, even with all of her training, nearly 100 shots back-to-back unbroken, without so much as a breath to stop and shake out the tension, was fatiguing her arm and skewing her aim. But the moment she stopped firing, the thwarps would close in again. She could sense them out there, massed behind the columns and the piled debris, calling out, peeking towards the forest ready for when her deadly stream of arrows stopped flowing. Meridia fired 3 times more, and with each arrow she glanced at the men around her, still fighting valiantly, but flagging under the assault. Despite the second wind at her arrival, they were running on empty. If they didn't fall back, find a defensible position, and signal for support, they'd all be Something flashed in from the cliffside, disappearing behind one of the thwart barricades. Then, like some bizarre sleight of hand, it was a thwarp who came flying out the other side, their skull pierced by an arrow. Shimmering white flashed under the battle lamps, and then striding from the shadows of the cliffs and the burning docks behind them came the holy and unholy form of a Lightcore warrior already bathed in blood. Around them lay a trail of dead and dying thwarps, some still spasming and twitching, and with each step the archer drew and fired, wielding a longbow that shone silver in the evening light and hummed like no wood Meridia had ever seen before. Even as their quiver went empty, the shining archer still fired, scavenging arrows from fallen Edarin comrades where the lines had faltered, all while dodging return fire and executing charging thwarps with the ease of someone who'd put down 1,000 hopeful warriors before. No one in the Light Corps could shoot like that. At least, no one that Meridia remembered. And on closer inspection, Meridia found that her memory had not failed her. Under the bloody white hood, she could not see his face, but with that hulking frame, the draw strength to bend iron, and aim to match, she knew exactly who had come to their aid. The false wolf. Hey there! If you're hearing this, it means you're listening to the public version of this episode. I appreciate you taking the time and your interest in the series. It really helps the algorithm, it helps us grow. But if you are enjoying the show, maybe take a look over at our Patreon. We have uncut versions of the early episodes, access to new chapters before they're released for the general public, and you can shape the future of the series by deciding on new merch drops, bonus content, and more. You can get started for free at patreon.com/Seventh Valkyrie. That's patreon.com/7THVALKYRIE. Hope to see you there.